Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Book Chat. Today we have Jeremy Anderberg. Jeremy, thank you for coming on the show today.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Alex. Thanks.
So, before we start talking about books, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Sure. So I'm a managing editor and podcast producer for the Art of Manliness website and podcast. It's artofmanliness.com. I've been in that role for coming up on 8 years or so here, I think. I've been working from home the whole time. So this new work from home phase for most people is kind of old news to me. So I haven't had any trouble getting used to that or anything, but I do that from my home office. I have two kids, age 5 and 2, and another one on the way coming in January. So yeah, that's really it. On the weekends, my wife and I like to hike and do a lot of baking and drink good craft beer and coffee and read a lot of books. So we have a simple life here in Arvada, but we're sure happy and we love it. So
Yeah, that sounds like a really pleasant life. And you mentioned
yeah,
you work for the Art of Manliness podcast, and I know you
yeah,
guys cover a lot of books, so that must be like a dream job for you to, have a job where you get paid to like read books and talk about books. How do you like working there?
it is. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So the podcast really took off probably about 5 years ago. We're up to episode 640 something, I think. So we do two episodes a week, and each episode is almost 95% of the shows are interviews with authors about books they've written. And so over the last handful of years, I've started getting handfuls of books from publishers, from folks trying to get onto the show, which is a ton of fun. So every week I'm getting 7 to 10 books from publishers, so that the piles just keep adding up in my office, which is just amazing. Yeah, so to be able to read for work is pretty great. In some ways, it's just the volume is intimidating, right? Just the number of things that I get. So what ends up happening a lot of times is I'll read the first quarter or the first third of a book just to get an idea of if they'd be a good fit for our podcast. And then if they are, then we dig in a little deeper. So yeah, if anything, it's too many books, right? So
Yeah, I'm in a similar position because I also have like a book podcast where I interview authors, and it's great to get free books, but sometimes it might be overwhelming. So I'd be interested in hearing, how do you decide, like, hey, this book would be a good fit for the podcast. Maybe this is a good book, but it's not a good fit for the podcast. So like, how do you filter through those?
sure, it's a good question. So the first thing is that it has to be a good story. That's kind of number one, right? And it has to then fit within our brand and what we do, whether it's philosophy, self improvement, fitness, that sort of thing. And then the other part is keeping it varied. That's actually really difficult too. So you can kind of tell trends in publishing. It's pretty interesting, just kind of based on what I'm getting in the mail. So for some reason, I remember like 2018, there were a number of like huge fat biographies that came out that were great. But then we just end up talking sort of about these giant historical figures all in a row, right? So then we have to look a little harder to find other topics of interest. So that's really the hard part, is just keeping things interesting and make sure we're not hammering in on one topic too much. So that's really what I look for. I'll kind of try to preview or review a book in within all of our categories in a set week or a set month. So whether that's philosophy or self-improvement, history, or whatever, that's kind of the key in terms of picking what I'm reading for work purposes.
Got it. Yeah, you want to kind of diversify and not just stick to like one topic for all month long. And so,
Yes.
since you're constantly reading for work, do you like kind of get tired of reading, or do you also enjoy reading after work? Like, how do you like balance that, like, always reading lifestyle?
Sure. So, the beauty of it is that my editor in chief allows me to pursue kind of the writing and the books that interest me, which is great. So a lot of the reading is fully blended. There are some things that I'm reading strictly for work purposes, but a lot of times I get to sort of incorporate into my work what I'm reading. So recently I read Bully Pulpit, which is a great biography, dual biography of Teddy Roosevelt and William Taft by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And I just started sort of reading it for fun, but was able to pull some lessons out from the book that I was then able to write about for an article. So that's often how it goes. If something is like really good, it'll kind of pull some writing out of me, which is great. As a reader and writer, that's kind of what you dream of. But yeah, there are certainly plenty of books that I love reading after my work hours. Definitely, I love reading, so there's just no reason to not be reading really in my book. So
Yeah, it sounds like yeah, you have like perfect life. Like you read for work and you get to read after work, and it's like a win-win situation.
yeah,
And so,
yeah,
so
it's great.
yeah, so like just talking to you, I could tell like you have a huge passion for reading, and like you could see behind you that huge bookshelf of yours. Were you always a reader in your life, or was there like a certain event that happened that made you into a reader?
Sure. So, I mean, really, as far as I can remember, I've been a reader. My mom was a reader, didn't go to college, very much a self-educated reader. Um, got into history, and then at one point got me into these assignments of picking books out from the library and then writing like little one-page essays about them. Which in the moment, like I was not thrilled to do, but I really enjoyed the books. And then ultimately now, like I so appreciate her doing that. But there was specifically the book Holes by Louis Sacker. I don't know if you know that book.
Yeah, they made it into a movie, right?
Um, yeah, really fun movie. Yeah. But that was the book that I, for some reason, just first remember being absolutely pulled into, where kind of your blinders on, right? The rest of the world disappears, and I was just sucked into Holes. And I read it a few times and loved it, and it kind of opened my eyes to like the real pleasure of reading, right? Beyond just reading something and then writing an essay about it. So yeah, there were kind of those two parts of it. So my mom kind of pushed me into the history nonfiction bits, and then I discovered Holes, and that got me into fiction and just the joy of reading.
Yeah, yeah. I think everyone remembers that one book that kind of, it wasn't just reading for like homework or assignment. It's like, hey, reading is actually fun, like this pleasant experience.
Yeah,
So it's pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
What was that for you? Do you have one?
Yeah. So it would be How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Sure,
That was
yeah,
like
really readable. Yeah,
Yeah, that was like the first like self-help book I read, and I was like, wow, it's not like a textbook. It's like it's educating, but it's also entertaining, and like it has all these lessons you could apply to your life. And I'm like, wow, this is like I didn't know books like this existed, and that kind of sparked
yeah,
my joy for reading.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
great.
And so you also have this newsletter called What to Read Next. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So it started 2.5 years ago, I think. And really, the genesis was just I was having coffee with a friend, and we were talking about books, and um, he just kind of said like, "Hey, you read a lot, you read widely, and across a lot of different topics, and I think other people would probably be interested in hearing what you're reading about too." And that was it. It's just that little spark, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that sounds kind of fun." So it started with the first handful of weeks with you know a few dozen subscribers, mostly friends, family, people I'd interacted with before. Then slowly grew through work and other freelance writing and stuff like that. And so now I have a few thousand folks who subscribe, and I send it out every Friday morning. And it's kind of a combination of my own take on what I'm reading that week, plus author interviews, fun lists, and links and stuff like that. So it's a ton of fun. Yeah, that's at bookdude.substack.com. And it's a lot of fun. I get to share what I'm reading with a bunch of people who, then actually buy the books I'm recommending, which is just great validation, and it's a lot of fun to see that people are doing the same reading that I'm doing. So
Yeah, yeah, it's awesome to be able to like share your passion and not just like, you read these books, but you inspire other people to read, and then they're happy that you recommended like a great book, and it's like, it's a great feeling not just to read books, but to share that wonderful experience with other people. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing you got going there.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's kind of a dream, like you said. So it's pretty great.
So when you're like reading and reviewing books for your own newsletter, is the criteria different of like what you enjoy from a book versus like what you look for to come on the podcast?
Yeah, a little bit. So again, there's some crossover and kind of what works for work and my own personal interests. But there's definitely some things that are different. So I read more fiction personally, whereas the podcast we pretty exclusively cover nonfiction. It's just easier to build a conversation around and to apply. to your life more explicitly. So yeah, when I'll read, generally at any given time, I'm reading one or two nonfiction books and also a novel. Often I'm reading a novel at night just to wind down, and so that'll make it into the newsletter for sure. So that's really, the primary difference is that I cover a lot more fiction in my newsletter. But otherwise there's plenty of crossover. And when it comes to novels, I'm really just reading at whim. I know you talked to Alan Jacobs on your podcast. His book, Reading for Pleasure, is just such a great book for a book lover and for a bibliophile. And his admonition to just read for pleasure and read at whim, pick up what interests you, has really resonated with me. So that's certainly kind of the philosophy that I take.
Yeah, I love this book, and he was great to have on the podcast. And yeah, that this example of reading at a whim, like following your curiosity, is a great piece of advice. And another thing I noticed that you shared that we have like similar like perspective on is that I think we both read like nonfiction during the day when we kind of have a little bit more energy and attention, and then we read like fiction or like more of a story type of book towards the end of the night where we kind of wind down and relax. And I think that's a great piece of advice. And like you've been reading for like a long time, is there like some key reading advice or tips you give to people when they ask you like, hey, how can I read more books? How can I, get more into reading?
Sure. Yeah, I get that question a lot. People ask, how do you read so much? All the time, And really the key is, it's the same answer I've heard from other people who like reading, is really just find books that you love to read and you'll make time to read, right? So I wake up, at somewhere in the 5 o'clock hour of the day. My kids aren't up till 7. And I'm really like, I'm up early just so I can have a cup of coffee and read and have some calm before the chaos of kids kind of invades the day. And then I'm able generally to read a bit for work during the day. And then, after the work day, I often have a book out, just kind of reading snippets here and there as, kids and making dinner allows. And then I'll read again at night before bed. So it's become a part of my lifestyle because I love to read. So if you find books that you enjoy, you'll make time to do it. So for me, it started out in college. It was a lot of kind of easy reading, narrative, nonfiction, or like cheap thrillers, Clive Cussler, Jack Reacher. It's sort of, those cheap mysteries, which you can get anywhere, which are great, right? If that's what you're reading, that's awesome. But what I found is that what naturally happens is that you'll kind of gravitate to not necessarily more difficult texts, but just older things that carry a little more punch. And you'll just kind of end up following, I think, actually sort of backwards, right? So if you start out with new stuff, what happens is I think you'll end up reading older things that have sort of influenced the new stuff that you like. And you just kind of keep working backwards, right? So now I'm into this phase where I can read an old big biography and really actually truly enjoy it, which is why I can get through it, right? Whereas that would certainly not have been the case like 10 years ago. So like anything, reading actually does take practice, which I don't think people realize. So it's, wherever you're at, whatever books you enjoy, certainly don't feel any guilt or shame about it, that you're not reading the right things or the right authors. I think just dig into what you love, and eventually you'll sort of just get to that point where you're reading things that will naturally broaden your horizons and expand your mind. So
Yeah, it's such a wonderful piece of advice. And this great quote from Naval Ravikant where he says, "Read what you love until you love to read." And yeah, so like any books you enjoy, like that counts as reading. Like when I was talking with Anne Bogle, the author of I'd Rather Be Reading, she shared this point in her book that there's no book police. Like no one's gonna come to arrest you if you haven't read like War and Peace or Moby Dick. And then when I told her that, she's like, "Oh, I haven't read those books either." And here's this author and podcaster that hasn't read these, famous classic books. But like, yeah, you could read like comic books, you could read mystery books. Like I used to love the Goosebumps series and like Alex Rider and all these other books. And like, just get into reading, and then you'll find your way into like the quote unquote good books and the classics.
right, yeah, absolutely. Because then you realize, that all of the authors that you enjoy reading are inevitably built upon those classics, right? Really, I mean, universally across the board, right? So it's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah. Eventually, you'll get to like those foundational books that all the other books are built upon. And so when you're reading, are you are you like a print, ebook, or audiobook? And also like, do you take notes while you're reading? Like, what are you doing? What's your process?
Sure. So I'm generally print book. I really love books as objects, um, and they hold my attention a lot better. So generally, I have a print book with pencil in hand, and if I come across really anything that makes me go like, "Huh, that's interesting," I'll just highlight it with pencil, and then when I finish the book, then I will actually go back through the pages and then type up the passages that I enjoyed. I'll type them right into a Google Doc. And it takes a lot of time, but it's well worth it, especially as someone who also writes. I mean, that's a pretty invaluable practice. Plus, it doubles to cement the ideas in your head. So that's more the case with nonfiction. When it's a novel, I'm less likely to do that. And it's more about just highlighting passages that I think are particularly moving or just like really, really beautiful prose. And when that happens, and I'm less likely to write in my novels for some reason, I'll often just quickly type something into my notes app on my phone, and then be able to scan through. So generally print books. That said, I do have a Kindle that I enjoy. When you're on the move, it's just so easy to pack a Kindle into your briefcase and always have something to read. Plus, like, when you're juggling small children like I am, having a 900-page book on my Kindle is way easier than trying to hold like a big hardcover book open on my lap. So it certainly comes in handy sometimes. When it comes to Kindle books, often I just grab what's on sale, honestly, and then kind of just pick something randomly to read and see whatever catches my interest. So when it comes though to books that mean a lot to me and that I'm interested in having in my collection, I'm certainly a print guy. So
Yeah, I feel like we're in the same boat. Like, yeah, kind of print books are kind of like my favorite books, and also like the ability just to write in them and highlight in them is like it has that advantage over like ebooks or audiobooks where it's a lot harder to do.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can't get into audiobooks for some reason. Like I've tried, and I can't like get like fully into the world because I want to catch every word. And I just worry that when I'm listening, I'm missing things. I've tried it a few times and just have yet to be able to get into it with either fiction or nonfiction. So
Yeah, and that's like totally fine. Like what I tell people is like experiment like with different book mediums and see like which one works best for you and like your lifestyle. Like there's some people
right.
that have a busy schedule and the only time they could read books is like when they listen to an audiobook on like their morning jog. And then other people like us, we're fortunate to have like print books and like we enjoy kind of the process of like writing in the actual book. And it's just like figuring out what you like and what works best for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So you read a lot of books, and I have kind of like this idea that just because a book is like a bestseller or like really popular, it doesn't mean it's for everyone. So I was wondering if you could share maybe one or two books that were really like bestsellers or like that had a lot of hype around them that you just like didn't enjoy or just couldn't get into.
Sure. So, I mean, the first one is Moby Dick. You already mentioned that one. I've read the whole thing. It took a few tries and it took a few months to do it. Parts of it were fine. But they're like the writing style just made it so hard to read. It's like really Victorian. And even with the short chapters, like it was just this really ornate writing style is just really hard to get into. I think like the story is great, like it's super interesting story itself. But then to take 800 pages to do it was just so unnecessary. It's like I'm glad I read it, but it's not a book that I recommend people try just because I think most people will not enjoy it unless you're a little bit crazy, which is fine. But I know some other people too who are in the same boat with Moby Dick. And then also, I think just as a function of my work and how many books I've read in the like personal development self-help world, it's like I can barely these days pick up a self-help book and enjoy it just because I've read so many over the last handful of years. So that, it's like I wish I could get more out of them these days, but unfortunately, like I can't. So the self-help books that have kind of stuck on my shelf for good are like Charles Duhigg's Power of Habits, and also I think Smarter, Faster,
Faster,
Better.
better.
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so those two are like really good. And then Chris Bailey's books on productivity, and that's like it, man. Otherwise, I can't get into it for some reason.
Yeah, and yeah, it's totally fine. Like I'm starting to feel kind of the same way. Like all these self-help books and
Yeah,
productivity books. Like really, it is like read these books and then go out and apply it. Like don't just keep reading self-help books. Like that's not gonna make.
right.
Yeah,
Right. And the studies and the anecdotes, it's like the same, the marshmallow test, like all the same studies kind of cited over and over again. So yeah, that's certainly a genre that could get repetitive.
yeah, totally. So we just talked about like some books that like we didn't enjoy. Let's go to the opposite side and maybe share like one or two books that like were life changing for you that like they made you into like a different person and kind of they were an inflection point in your life.
Sure. Yeah. So I was late to the classics. In high school they were assigned. I would just kind of blow off the assignments. So I eventually, when I was probably 24, picked up The Great Gatsby. One of my all-time favorites. It's, I mean, short, which is like great, right? It's like readable within a couple days. Uh, the prose is just enchanting. I mean, the language is just incredible. It reads like poetry, but like with a story, right? And it's just incredible. And then at the same time, it's also like this sort of gritty, like noir crime novel that just like I feel like perfectly captures the America of the 1920s and really opened my eyes to like just the beauties of classic literature. And I've read it a few times, and I'm looking forward to reading it again here soon. So definitely, The Great Gatsby is one of them. Another one I think that probably resonates with a lot of readers is Fahrenheit 451. Uh, I love dystopia sort of as a genre of fiction anyway. So then to combine that with the idea of sort of portraying what happens when books lose their value in a society is just incredible to me. And I think just gets more prescient as the years go on, as people just get more sucked in by their screens and less attuned to books. I returned to my notes on this one uh, quite a bit. And so that's fiction. In terms of nonfiction, huge biography of Samuel Johnson. It's older. Do you know Samuel Johnson, the name by chance?
No, but I think he's a meme, and that's where I know him from.
Oh, really? It's possible, yeah. So he was one of the most well-known intellectuals of the 1700s, and then I mean, one of the people that school children would learn about through the 1800s, even mid 1900s. Really, it's only in the last couple decades that people aren't learning about Dr. Johnson. So he was an essayist, a book reviewer, and critic, and then also a lexicographer. So he wrote one of the first dictionaries. This book is just incredible. It goes into his life as a poor young boy and how he learned to like just embrace his calling as a writer and essayist and reader. It's from the 70s, I believe. Samuel Johnson by Walter Jackson Bate. It's just a really moving and readable biography. I just read it a couple years ago at the recommendation of Jim Mustick, 1,000 Books to Read Before You Die. He has said that this was one of the most moving reading experiences of his life, and I would have to agree with him there. So there's a few for you.
Awesome. Well, I've read the first two, haven't read the last one, so I'll definitely have to look into that. So thank you for sharing those. And so my closing question is, if you could spend an hour with any author, dead or alive, who would it be, and what would you want to talk about with them?
Oh man, what a great question. Off the top of my head, I would pick Charles Dickens. I have like this sort of just like weird obsession with Dickens, even though I've only read a few of his books, but it's sort of this life goal I have to read really everything he ever wrote. So every year in January, the first book I read for the year is a Dickens. So that's been going for a few years, and I've read Christmas Carol probably three of the last five Christmases. So his writing is just, it's like, it's a little Victorian, of course. It's a little bit tough to read, but then it's one of those, like, once you get into it, you're actually following the story more than you realize. He's like funny, but also he writes his characters in sort of this caricature-ish way where they're either all good or all bad, which is sort of annoying sometimes, but also like it makes for nice reading, right? The characters aren't complicated, right? You can root for little Oliver Twist with no qualms, right? There's no like complicated backstory, which I really love, and I think his insight into like social life, and like who people really are is just incredible. And he's an interesting guy. He's a really complicated person who was writing for the sake of making a living, and oftentimes inflated his page counts because back then they were many times paid by the page, right? But there's still these enduring works of fiction and some nonfiction that have sort of laid the foundation for all of literature after that. So I would have to go with Dickens. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's an awesome pick, and I haven't read that many of his books, but he's definitely on my like to be read classic list. So thank you for bringing that up. So Jeremy, I'm sure listeners have enjoyed this conversation. They want to like learn more about you. Like where's the best place for them to find you or contact you, like on social media or your website? Could you tell us where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that opportunity. So the newsletter is bookdude.substack.com, and you can subscribe and take a look at old issues. I'm up to 140 some weeks running, so you can read kind of what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And then I'm also on Twitter and Instagram at Jeremy Anderberg. It's JeremyAnderberg. And I'm happy to engage there. You can also just shoot me an email about books, jeremy.anderberg@gmail.com. I can't not respond to an email about books. So find me anywhere. I'd love to chat.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's wonderful. And Jeremy, I really enjoyed you taking the time today to talk about books and sharing all this great advice and your recommendations. So I just want to say thank you for coming on Book Chat and sharing your passion with books with all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I really appreciate the chance.
Thank you.